Hi there, I'm Kevin Gentry, and welcome to the Going Big podcast, where we explore the strategies and stories behind transforming your effectiveness by 10xing your fundraising and marketing. Each week, I'll be sitting down with some of the most influential business leaders, CEOs, and nonprofit visionaries to talk about leadership, the power of giving, and how to make a real impact. If you're ready to go big and to elevate your organization to new heights, you're in the right place. You can find the Going Big podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on social media and visit our website, 10x Strategies, TENX Strategies.com, for some great free resources. Let's dive in. Well, today I'm pleased to welcome three great friends who are themselves transforming their effectiveness by all new approaches in communicating with the outside world. And that's our purpose in today's discussion. How can you think about transforming your own organizations or personal effectiveness by 10xing your fundraising and marketing by all new approaches in communicating to the outside world? It's a big world. How do we reach all new audiences? How do we engage them more effectively? How do we expand our audiences? How do we take our message to new segments, new ways that people can become more engaged in our important missions and help us to achieve so much more today? So I've got three great guests, Jeff Crank, Cesar, and John Quick. Each of them have done some amazing transformation in communications in the last few years. And gentlemen, I'm just going to ask you each to tell listeners a little bit about your own story, what you learned along the way, and then we're going to take that as an application to how listeners can do this themselves. So I want to start off with Jeff Crank. Jeff, I've known you for a number of years as a great ally at Americans for Prosperity. You've been a very effective leader there, state level, regional level, national level. But a few years ago, you started a radio talk show in Colorado Springs, and you've recently taken that into the American Potential podcast. And to me, you've really just taken what you're doing to all new levels. Help people understand exactly how this came about, what's going on, what did you learn along the way?
Sure. Well, thanks, Kevin. It's great to be with you. And, I started actually 14 years I spent on the radio doing a show in Colorado Springs. It was a local radio talk show. And, I learned the craft there. It was a great opportunity to learn how to communicate on the radio without any, obviously video. You have to learn how to speak without those, with those non-verbal cues being present. So, it's something that you kind of have to hone, and I did that over a period of time. But I saw radio, really change over the years, and there were some other issues as well that kind of caused me to rethink that. But my good friend John Quick, who you'll talk with in a bit, actually came to me one day as a regional vice president at Americans for Prosperity, and John said, Jeff, why doesn't AFP have a podcast? We should do a podcast and you should host the podcast. And this was literally maybe 2.5 years ago when he said that. And I said, well, sounds like a great idea, John. What do you know about podcasting? We kind of talked through that. And, John just has great experience at promoting podcasts on social media and helping them grow. And he's the brainchild behind it. We took it to the CEO, Emily Seidel, and as an idea. And I mean, I give her great credit for it because as a leader, she could have just said, I don't know what, but she didn't say that. She said, sounds like a great idea. You have the expertise on this. I trust you to go do it. So go do it and bring back a plan. So we worked with the marketing folks and others, came up with a plan, have grown that podcast. And again, I'm just the guy that's fortunate enough to kind of ride on the back of all of these great people. But, John has built that into, we were counting it the other day. We now have, and it's basically almost been 2 years, been a year and 9 months, I think. And in that time, we now have about 400,000 downloads and video views of each episode of our podcast. And we do a podcast 3 times a week. And so it's just been remarkable growth, but it's all been driven by John, who does it. He doesn't spend a ton of money doing it, but he does it. It's the effective way that he does it that has really made this podcast grow. So I give him all the credit. I'm just sort of the ugly face that gets to ride on the beautiful horse.
Well, Jeff, you're always very encouraging in the way you work with others. So thank you for your team spirit here. We want to hear from John in a minute, but this is so exciting because it's just taken these important principles and messages that you all have and just take them to a much bigger audience. So really want to get into more of the how-to, but let's go to the next story. Cesar Grajales is with us. Cesar, you've been with the Libre Initiative for a number of years. You have a very compelling American dream story about how you and your dad came to the United States with $80 to get a first night's hotel room before you entered the workforce, and just really an amazing story. But at Libre, over time, after being state leader in Florida, you became the national spokesperson and really tapped into a lot of Spanish language opportunities, reaching millions of Americans in that way. You have now a very popular radio talk program in South Florida. Now it's being broadcast beyond South Florida. But you also started a podcast recently, Sabora Freedom, which has taken off. So tell us in a similar way to Jeff Crank, what lessons that you've learned, how did it come about, and what potential do you see for the future?
Thank you, Kevin. Well, for me, everything started with all the media opportunities that I had previously as you said, the spokesperson for Libre, going to the traditional media outlets like Univision, Telemundo, CNN en Español, and either analyzing a specific topic or being part of a debate. But I understood that the time being there sometimes was really like short time, not that enough time to really get into the depth of the topics. So the years of experience going to these places gave me the opportunity to being approached actually by a radio station in Miami, La Poderosa 670M, which is part of the Salem Media Group, and is a conservative radio station. And they gave me the opportunity to create this show, El Panorama Político, of political perspective, where I analyze Monday to Friday, 5:30 a.m., what is happening in politics and policy in the United States, 100% in Spanish, for that audience that is consuming content in Spanish. So transitioning from being on-air guest from time to time now to be the host of the radio show, that had given me the chance to really grow my base and followers and people who is paying attention to the topics that I'm talking about and disseminating when I do my analysis. But also, that's the traditional way to do it. Radio station, traditional TV. And then at the Libre Initiative, we saw what Jeff Crank was doing with the American Potential and John Quick. So Jose Malea, the CEO of Libre, and also a few others on Libre, Daniel Garza, the president of Libre, they also said we should have a podcast 100% in Spanish. And let me give you the numbers why. There's over 60 million Latinos living in the United States. Over 40% of those consume content 100% in Spanish. And there was no a podcast or media outlet providing the values and visions and the topics from our perspective. Most of the people who consumes content in Spanish is getting from the traditional Univision, Telemundo media outlets, and they have some certain tendency of a different perspective than the perspective that we have here at Stand Together AFP, the Libre Initiative. So we created that based in and inspired by the American potential and the success that they have. But again, in 100% Spanish uh, language. So inspired by that, we invite John Quick to give us ideas of how we can uh, take this podcast to multiple people everywhere, not just us posting it there on the Libre platform, but actually having a strategy behind of that. So John Quick has been instrumental on creating that, helping us to create that strategy. However, also the level of the production, like uh, uh, Manny Lara, who is based in Miami, who's the producer of this podcast, has been key on the color, the content, even the name of the show, which is Sabor a Freedom. I translate in English, Taste of Freedom. And two things we want to accomplish with the podcast. Number one is inspire the Hispanic community. Remind people, immigrants, why we came to this country in the first place and why we should involve for the same failing policies that we left behind. And second, touch a little bit of policy in the country, but not going into heavy policy. Because sometimes people get home, they're tired, they don't want to listen to the heavy policy. And or sometimes they're just driving from home to work and they just want to be inspired and educated in an easy way about certain topics. And that's the goal that we have been trying to achieve in the past 8 or 9 months since we started the podcast. And in the first season, we managed to get 1.3 million views. And again, that's thanks to the help of people like John Quick and many others who has been contributing in the strategy to get this podcast to many people across the nation.
That's amazing, Cesar. And we want to hear more about Jeff and Cesar, how you all thought about, the vision that you had for this. What were your objectives? And then sort of what strategy did you apply to achieve those objectives and how you're getting that? But John, everybody keeps mentioning your name. Tell us your own journey about how you developed a podcast and how you thought Jeff and Cesar could apply it to their work. And just begin to give us a sense of the opportunity that's out there today and maybe some of the missed opportunities you see with a lot of causes that are just missing out on reaching bigger and newer audiences.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you having me on, Kevin. And, I think one of the big factors is, if you look at somebody who's maybe being successful in the podcast world or even the radio world, and somebody who's not, is just kind of not being fearful to start, because I think a lot of people just maybe don't know how to start. They're too scared to start. They want it perfect before they start. And one of the things I always tell folks and my friends is you have to kill people with content in a good way. To be somebody who's constantly producing content is a good thing in today's market. You used to have to, back in the 90s, if you wanted to do something like a video podcast or whatever, you'd have to have a camera crew and a film crew and lots of overhead and a studio. And there's this great invention now called the iPhone, where you can produce really good quality content at any given time, at any day. And podcasting is just such a great avenue, because you don't have to convince a Fox News or a CNN or an ABC or an NBC to pick up your show. You can go on to iTunes and open a video podcast channel for free, and anybody can do that that's listening. And so how I cut my teeth is I was involved, I still am involved in a news organization in Alaska, and we had a podcast, we had a host, we had somebody who was doing it, and they were doing an awesome job. Well, they wanted to move to Florida, and so we needed to find somebody new. And it was small news organization, me and a friend, and we kind of drew straws, and I had the shortest straw, and so I was the new podcast host. I didn't have really any experience in podcasting, had some in marketing, but had no experience really in podcasting. And so I learned how to do this all through trial and error, what works, what doesn't work. And really, there's such a huge opportunity for folks, whether you have a brand or a nonprofit or even a for-profit business. There's such an opportunity for folks to share about what they're doing, what their brand's doing through podcasts and video podcasts. And the opportunity is still there. It's not saturated. It's a very low upfront cost. And really anybody can do it. And so somebody, the folks sitting here on the call, you all are just perfect examples of being able to do that and reaching lots of people. I think, Jeff, the last time we looked, the American Potential podcast has over 35 million views or downloads, for the shows. And that's just phenomenal. It's a show that's ranked, I think we're the 7th most popular political podcast in the US. And, the opportunities abound. We didn't have, we weren't a big news organization that launched a sub brand. We were a brand new podcast out the gate, and we've been able to reach 36 million people, which is pretty phenomenal. And others can do that as well. So
all right,
that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you very much, John. I want to dive in a little bit more about the sort of what's and how's to do it, but let's do a little bit more just to understand what you all have done. I'm going to do a couple of speed rounds. So it'll be Jeff, Cesar, and John. The first is, help me understand just sort of how would you describe your podcast today in a sentence or two? And then I'm going to come back around in terms of the vision and the strategy and then the results of what you've done. So Jeff, starting off, what's the name of your podcast and how do you describe it to the public, and how would you describe it at your Thanksgiving dinner table to your relatives?
Sure. It's the podcast is American Potential, and we basically tell the stories of Americans all across our country who are breaking government-imposed barriers and reaching their American dream.
That's awesome. Cesar Grajales. So Jeff is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. You're in Miami, Florida. How do you describe Sabor a Freedom?
Sabor of freedom is the taste of freedom, the taste of liberty. And we just want to inspire and remind the Hispanic American community in the United States how good tastes freedom, and get inspired and also fight for the right policies in the United States.
And you interview guests as well?
I'm sorry?
You interview guests as well, just like...
Yeah. Of course. We have many different guests from many different walks of lives. From music industry, from a famous priest, from someone who fought for the human rights in Cuba. So many walks of lives that really inspire what it means to be an immigrant, to be a Hispanic American, even in the United States, but also reminding that to the day-to-day Latino who is going to work in many different jobs in the country, what is the taste of freedom? And the taste of freedom is precisely everything that you can accomplish in this country because of that freedom that you just got moving to the United States, and also protecting those freedoms for not just for the Hispanic American, but all Americans in general.
Excellent. And John Quick, you couldn't get more further away from Miami than where you are in Alaska. Tell us about your podcast. How do you describe it?
So my podcast is The United States of Small Business, and I interview small business owners all over the U.S. and hear their stories. We've just had some phenomenal guests. The first season is done, 54 episodes, and there's a book as well to go along with it. Hearing from folks who a guy in Montana started Montana Knife Company, and how it's just blossomed and bloomed into a huge success, to the founder and owner of Jackson Hewitt, the largest tax company in the U.S., and mom pop coffee shop owner. So everything in between. And it's just fun to hear folks' stories and their ups and downs and trials of being a small business owner in the U.S.
All right, Jeff, you touched on this, but what do you see as the objective of your podcast? And when you look back, sometime in the future, you look back on the podcast, how will you evaluate your success?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to be entertaining. I mean, if you want to catch an audience, you have to have a product that people won't listen to just once, but they'll listen to many more times. And then from that, I want to inspire people to be entertained, but also to use the knowledge that they have to inspire them to go do the same thing and to go up and break a government barrier imposed on them by their city, by their county, by their state, or by the federal government. And if we're doing that, that's the success.
Cesar, as you mentioned, there are 67 million Latinos in the United States. That's the estimate. And as you noted, 40% of them almost exclusively seeking Spanish language media sources. Your podcast is in Spanish, but what do you see as success? In a year or two, looking back, how would you evaluate your success?
I think one of the things that we can say, the reason why the podcast is successful and is growing is because it's authentic. People really see the stories of these guests as like authentic story, something that they get inspired, but also they get thinking. They start thinking about, for instance, if we talk about cutting red tape for businesses to grow, and you're listening from someone who is now a very successful business owner, and maybe you have some ideas about the government regulating, but now you listen to this business owner explaining why it shouldn't be in that way, too much regulation in this sector, X or Y. So then you see that these people is connecting the dots through this podcast. But again, they see that it's authentic. And I think it's important to discuss timely and relevant topics in the podcast, but also in an authentic way. And people really, really get inspired when they see that it's a real story. And that's what we're trying to do, bringing real day-to-day Hispanic Americans that is going to inspire the other members of the community.
I'm hearing a consistent theme here. So, John, how do you evaluate your success?
Well, I think, I've gotten some really awesome emails over the course of the first season of the United States of Small Business podcast, hearing stories from folks that got inspired just to start their journey, their entrepreneur journey. And man, those emails make me want to do season 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, because these authentic stories that folks are telling on the podcast are inspiring folks who maybe felt like they're stuck in their job, that they're in the 9-to-5 grind and they're not happy. Those stories of these small business owners have inspired those kinds of folks to go start their entrepreneur journey. And to me, that's worth its weight in gold.
Well, the additional benefit of what you all have done is that it exposed you all in a much more positive way. Jeff Crank, I don't know that our listeners would necessarily know, but you're the Republican nominee for Congress from Colorado's 5th District, I believe, and widely expected to win this fall. Certainly being a podcaster, having that bigger presence helped you to some degree in your primary. You're better known to voters. Cesar Grajales, I know that, as you mentioned, a lot of the big Spanish language media outlets and others are reaching out to you more as a result of the certification you have now through your podcast and your programs. And John, you mentioned the sales of your book and things like that, which is really an additional benefit. My next question, so this podcast is how to go big with your fundraising and marketing for your organization, for your cause. How would you see the opportunity for a lot of nonprofit causes to do their own podcast, much in the way that Americans for Prosperity or Libre did, that would really sort of 10x not only their effectiveness in terms of their outreach, what they're able to achieve towards their mission, but also in terms of reaching new audiences that can support them as well? Jeff, I'll start with you again.
Yeah, I think first of all, John's a statement about content. That's really key. You really have to be willing to stick with it and produce lots of content. We do 3 episodes a week. That content continues to come out. And so I think if you do that and you're willing to do that and stay the long haul there, I think you can really use this to get your message out I think of all the people who have been exposed to Americans for Prosperity through American Potential, because they heard just maybe one episode and then decided to go sign up and do something with one of the state chapters of Americans for Prosperity. So I think it's really important to trust good people who know what they're doing. Find yourself a John Quick. He's already taken, though. Nobody can
Yes.
steal him from us. Right, Cesar?
No.
But
Yes.
go find yourself a John Quick, an expert. Trust them to help you build it. And the sky is the limit.
Cesar, what are your comments?
I would say whether it's radio or social media or podcasting, people respond to consistency, as Jeff was saying, honesty and engagement. And if you are wondering right now and asking yourself, do I have the talent to do this? Well, ask first yourself, do you have a story to share? Do you have something valuable to share? I promise you, you have something to share. And if you have that story, that talent, that information to share, as John also mentioned, just open a channel. Start from somewhere, but just start sharing that. And I promise you, you will see great results.
All right. Well, John, what kind of words of wisdom would you have to listeners? What are the sort of first steps to take? Is this a missed opportunity for a lot of organizations when you do a quick scan of their own social media efforts or their online presence? Do you see a lot of missed opportunities? And then relative to that, what would you advise more groups do?
Yeah, I think there's just a tremendous opportunity. I think that most organizations that I see doing this, they want to have a perfect product before they go live with it. They want to have the perfect picture, the perfect sound, the perfect video, the perfect audio. And oftentimes they won't even put anything out because it's not deemed good enough quality. And so the thing that the most biggest detriment I see folks do is the fear of the unknown. And I think that if you're wanting to get your product so perfect that it has to reach a certain standard before it goes out the door, you're going to miss the thing that's most important, and that is to have an authentic product. And so people want to see and experience real stories. And so I think if you're a nonprofit out there that's listening, just tell your story of your nonprofit, your stories of people that have been impacted by your nonprofit, your stories of other organizations that's been impacted by your nonprofit. Telling those stories in a true, authentic way is going to inspire folks. You don't need to come up with a Hollywood script. You need to just get in front of a mic and talk about why you care about your brand. And so just starting is what I would encourage folks to do, and telling that true, authentic story that whatever your brand is you work for, maybe it's Red Cross or maybe it's the YMCA, every nonprofit out there like that has folks that they're impacting. Go find those folks that your nonprofit is impacting and get them in front of an iPhone and talk to them about why your nonprofit has impacted their life in a positive way, and then go on to the next one. And pretty soon you'll have a dozen of those, and the ball will just kind of keep rolling.
Well, great advice. It's so easy to overcomplicate things. We want to make the perfect the enemy of the good. You all are all risk takers. I mean, you're working in the public policy space, but frankly, you're serial entrepreneurs. And I applaud the fact that you didn't wait to be asked. You just did it. And look how we're all benefiting as a result. So one of my last speed rounds is I'd like you to tell the audience, first of all, what they ought to consider avoiding in this. And second of all, what do you recommend them to see as the biggest opportunity to take advantage of? And maybe even in that vein, how to assess their own assets or what it is that they could really seize upon to utilize in this space. Jeff, I'll start with you again.
Well, I would say don't be afraid to try it, because I look back. I mean, I started in radio 20 years ago, and I've listened to that first tape of me. I have no idea why they kept inviting me back, but they did. And but so you can't wait to be great to do it. Just get out and do it. As John said, get out there and do it. And there is an authentic, people talk about talk radio and why it has succeeded for so long. It's real. It's real people having a real conversation. And that's why podcasts have followed and really grown into what they are today, and really kind of eclipsing what talk radio once was, because they're authentic conversations. And that's what people yearn for. It's not a DJ sitting there with a fake voice spinning a record. It's an authentic conversation. Get out there and take the risk and do it. You can do it.
Cesar Corrales?
Media is transforming constantly, and now we are benefiting from all the platforms that we have, from Instagram to Facebook, from TikTok, from many other platforms that we can have access for free. And even X, for instance, that now has added new multiple options to podcast, to go live. And you notice that from famous reporters that they had left their previous jobs in famous media outlets, and now they're doing very well, even better than joining when they were part of those traditional media outlets through their own platforms that are live streamed through X or through Facebook. So if people who has the experience, they see that moving from the traditional media outlet to more digital aspect is actually the way to be now. You have access to that for free, and there is nothing stopping you to start creating that content and sharing your experience, sharing your knowledge with your audience, and especially if this is a nonprofit and you want to reach out more people to connect to that nonprofit, inspire the community, just open a channel, any channel. It could be the Facebook page, and you go live there every day or at least twice a week and share some comments, some ideas, and I promise you that community is going to start growing. But they will see you authentic. Going back again to that topic, I think authenticity is important in the communication aspect. People will see that as uh, reliable. Oh, I see, that person looks to me. This person is seriously talking to me. In fact, it's even better now that being in the TV studio, because the TV studio, all the cameras, all the lights and everything, they people feel like, okay, this is a little bit disconnected with me. But if you had a camera like now, this camera right here, each of us are in a different rooms, but this is not a special studio. It's just a camera on and we are talking. If we are doing this right now, you can do it too, and you can get inspired and inspire many other people.
That's great. John?
So I'd say a couple things. Remember to have fun. I think that social media podcast should not be something that is a bulletin board you're posting information on. It's a relationship. And so remember that as you're stepping out in there into the deep end, that it's not transactional, it's relational. And so helping to engage with your audience as much as you can is going to really benefit your brand in some very big ways. So you're not just posting stuff to post stuff, you're posting stuff to maybe change somebody's life down the road that's going to view your podcast or your social media post. And the other thing is, some folks may not know how to start, right? And so we have this really cool thing called AI technology right now, where you can get a very helpful assistant and tell you exactly the 7 steps you need to do. So for folks listening in that are like, well, where do I even start? What are the 12 things I need to do? Go to ChatGPT right now. It's free. You don't even have to have a login anymore. And type into ChatGPT, how do I start a podcast? What are the 12 steps? And it will literally list you all the 12 things you have to do from the back end perspective of some of the technical stuff to do to start a podcast. And so utilizing technology that exists is very key. Don't be afraid of the technology. You can utilize it to help you propel your brand into success where you may not otherwise have thought you'd be successful.
All right, I've got 2 last questions, and this first one follows on what John just mentioned. Tell me if you've had fun doing this. If you want to cite an example, great. Cesar, I'm going to start with you. And then the final round is going to be, what's your final word, your final bit of advice, of inspiration, of encouragement that you'd offer to our audience? But Cesar, has this been fun for you?
Oh yes, of course. I have a lot of fun every single time I record an episode. And previously to recording the episode, I have a conversation with the guest, and just to connect in that personal level with that guest. And again, if you don't have fun doing what you're doing, whatever it is, I mean, people will perceive that. And I guess through the podcast and communication, people see that you're having fun, that you're really enjoying this, and you really believe in the cause and the messaging and whatever it is that you are spreading through your channel. If you have fun and you really believe in that, people will see it, they feel it, they notice. In fact, let me tell you this: when I go to the radio, and I think Jeff probably uh, know this too, but when you go to the radio, even if the people is driving and they don't see you, they can feel if you are smiling or not. So to me, it's that. Even if the podcast has a video, I smile because people in Spotify is listening, and I know they will listen, and they will feel if I'm enjoying it, if I am smiling, if I'm really having fun during the recording, or it's just a mere transaction, it's just a job, it's just a 9 to 5 job. No, no, no. This is fun. This is entertainment. I'm inspiring people.
Jeff Crank.
Yeah, I mean, I have a blast. I've had a blast over my whole career of doing this, and every day gets more and more fun. And I look at it as if I'm not having fun, then it's probably time to stop. But I think Cesar is correct. People will know if you're authentically having fun. And I can say, I could easily say, people will know if you're authentically having fun. Or I can
Exactly.
say, people will know if you're authentically having fun. I mean, you can hear it in someone's voice. So yeah, I have a blast.
Here, here. That's great. John Quick.
Yeah, I think having a fun time is very important to anything you're doing, whether it's your day job or starting a new podcast or going on social media for the first time. I think having a positive experience and having fun is so key. And Jeff and I have just had a blast over the last 3 years, dreaming and scheming with the podcast American Potential, and laughs along the way. And so I think that's very important. And if you're not doing that, I would say reevaluate what you're doing, because I would encourage folks to spend time on things that they care about and that they find are producing positive results in their life.
All right. So the final word, and John, we're going to start with you. What's the final word you want this audience to hear about doing a podcast in order to go big?
Yeah. So if you're out there and let's say you're a director of a nonprofit, or you're the president or the CEO of a nonprofit, and you're thinking, well, how do I do this? Nobody is going to care about what I have to say. I'm here to tell you they will care about it, because you have a donor base, you have an email list base, you have maybe a little following on social media. People care about what you're doing, in a small town in Ohio running a nonprofit. And so I've often heard people use the phrase, your mess is your message. And people want to resonate with you as a person. And so just start to kind of formulate on what are the stories you could tell that you already tell at maybe fundraiser donor dinners or one-on-one donor coffee, appointments. What are those stories you could tell that you could just retell on a podcast? And I guarantee you would have a dozen or so stories that you've been telling along the way the whole time. You just want to put it into a podcast form now. So just start. It's my biggest advice I give to everybody is just to start. It's not going to be perfect, but if you start, it's a good day.
All right. Cesar Grajales, what's your final word?
Well, whether you are speaking to 10 people or 10,000 people, the key is to show up with authenticity and bring value to the conversation. People will really appreciate that, and never underestimate the power of persistence. If you're there, constancy, every single day, posting, or at least 2-3 times a week, posting something, people will value that, and the impact will follow. That is for sure.
And Jeff Crank, you got us started, and you're also our candidate for Congress running this year. So you get the final word, the final of the final words.
There you go. But I'm not running for the Senate, so I can't filibuster. I'll be quick. Well, look, we've talked about some of this already, but I think there's 4 really key things to success. One, you got to have fun. And I mean, I think that's a key to success in life. But if you're going to be successful on a podcast, you have to have fun and be entertaining and show people that you have that. You have to have passion for what you do. And if you're already involved in a nonprofit, you probably already have the passion for that. I have passion for liberty and freedom. That's why I think American Potential has been a success. You have to surround yourself with talented people, right? John Quick, many others who, we've got a person who runs our podcast. They book our guests and all that, and they just do a great job. Monica does a wonderful job for us. And then finally, you got to innovate. You got to be willing to try new things. We kicked off our podcast. We started it before we had video capabilities. We did the first few episodes audio only. And then we said, you know what? Why wouldn't we do a video one? Let's go do it. And we did it. And that's been a huge success. To me, if you do those 4 things, you're going to be very successful.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to go big with your fundraising and marketing in order to go big with your cause, remember, if you're dedicated to solving some big problem in society today, you're trying to get to the root causes of that problem, you need the additional resources in order to do that. You owe it to those you're trying to help to transform your effectiveness and to go big. And consider from today's conversation, a podcast might be just that ticket to help your organization go into the stratosphere. We'll be back again soon. Jeff Crank, Cesar Grajales, John Quick, thank you for joining us. We'll see you again. All right, let's all go big. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Going Big podcast. I hope today's conversation inspired you to take your fundraising and marketing strategies to a whole new level. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, iTunes, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Pandora, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also watch all of our episodes on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on social media and visit our website, 10xstrategies.com. That's TENX strategies.com for more great content and for free resources to help you go big with your leadership and with your giving. I'll see you on the next episode of the Going Big podcast.